Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of SellerSPEAK. I'm Ram Menon, your Director for Global Community Outreach at SellerApp. Today we are joined by a CEO, lawyer with a demonstrated history working in e-commerce, Schick. Jeff is a seven-figure Amazon seller and an attorney for Amazon sellers. Jeff heads Amazon suspension, marketplace dispute resolution, and marketplace strategy at Francis and Rafelson and Schick. Jeff's Amazon journey began in 2011 when he was still enrolled in Law Time School. As a student, he ran an Amazon business that grew over 2 million per sales. Jeff provides innovative legal strategies for entrepreneurs and brands to control their online market presence. He specializes in helping Amazon sellers with infringement claims, Amazon account suspension, reinstatement, and intellectual property protection. Apart from e-commerce law, Jeff is also skilled in entrepreneurship, management, and marketing. Jeff will share his experience, tips, knowledge with us today on SellerSPEAK. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be on here.
To start off, Jeff, we see that more and more sellers are private labeling their products these days and registering for a trademark that ensures the protection of the private label. Our viewers are looking to set a brand that will be interested to know ways and successfully apply for a trademark. What are the benefits of trademarking a private label?
So there's really two areas that trademarks help with private labels. The first is going to be your Amazon areas. So like for instance, brand registry, which gives you enhanced brand content, the ability to protect your brand on Amazon. The second aspect is actual, from a business perspective, where trademarks are beneficial. So that's where when you've got your trademark, you actually own that name and you can control it in the marketplace, whether it be Amazon, eBay, Jet, Walmart, whatever channel you're on, you can then actually control how it's being sold and you get to control basically your product's future. So a trademark is essentially a way of differentiating your product. So that if you've got, for instance, a fidget spinner, if you've got a trademark on your fidget spinner, your brand of fidget spinner, you can now sell it in any medium as your fidget spinner without someone else jumping on your listing and selling against you and competing for the buy box. Or even it also helps prevent, someone else from trying to counterfeit, your brand. So really the trademark's that foundation that helps create a lasting business. And that's kind of what takes you from the difference between, when you're just doing it as a hobby and becoming a real business, and in a lot of people's opinion, when you've got that intellectual property to actually offer.
Do you see a lot of Amazon sellers private labeling their products these days?
We do. So more and more sellers are going the private label route, especially because of the fact that, it is that one way that you don't have to compete for the buy box quite as fiercely as when you are going down the regular, the online arbitrage or retail arbitrage route where it's, pennies is so important down in that arena. So more and more sellers are turning towards private label because they realize that it's the way to create something that's lasting, that's theirs, something that can actually be sold, because it's very hard to sell a business that's just a arbitrage business going forward, because essentially without considering the reviews and other metrics that you build up over time in your account, with an arbitrage business, anyone could just arbitrage your arbitrage. They could start their own, sell on Amazon account and sell against you. And when you have private label, now you've actually built something of real value that you're building and get to keep for the future.
Makes absolute sense. To move on to an important question, of late an increasing number of sellers have been facing account suspensions. Many sellers make a common mistake which damages the appeal process. You have also faced an account suspension while you were still in law school. With your experience, what are the right practices to revoke a suspension and have an account reinstated?
So there's two areas of going down this path that I would have to say. The first is it's definitely something that sellers can handle themselves, but they have to make sure they know what they're doing, because Amazon's becoming increasingly more strict on giving you a certain number of tries to get it right before they just give you the email that says, we've reviewed your information and you may no longer sell on Amazon, at which case then it becomes increasingly more difficult to get your account reinstated. So the first step is really, don't waste any of those tries by just sending in, something that's not really well thought out. The second step is, if you don't know what you're doing, it's actually better to hire a professional. There's reinstatement firms, there's other law firms, there's our firm, any of those avenues, to hire a professional to get it right. Because although there's a higher upfront cost in having someone write that plan of action, when you have a professional do it, there's a much better chance that it's going to be reinstated much faster. So I've seen some of our clients that have come to us and they've sent plan after plan, and it's been days and days and days of missed sales before they finally came to us. And then, we wrote a plan of action and it was reinstated in 18 hours from when we finished this plan of action to when they were reinstated. So, it just goes to show, I mean, yes, they had to pay our firm to do the work, but if they would have done it, 5 days earlier, think of all those other sales that they would have gotten along the way. So that's one plug. The second plug is if you're going to actually do it yourself, then something that's really important is to take a step back and realize that Amazon doesn't suspend accounts just for fun. They're suspending it because there's a problem. So a lot of sellers, and it's extremely hard, when my account got suspended, I had to deal with this too, where you sit back and you're like, I've done nothing wrong. It's the customer's fault, but Amazon is extremely customer focused. And so you have to sit back and realize that there's something that went wrong. And so even though you don't feel like it's your fault and it's not fair, you have to take the emotion out of it and just kind of sit back and realize that, okay, something went wrong. Let's figure out what it is. And once you realize what those root causes are that caused that suspension, it makes writing the plan of action significantly much more easy to do. Because if you don't take the time and you sit there and say the customer's wrong, they just mistook that the product, they said the product, for instance, a used sold as new complaint, and the customer's wrong. They thought the product was used, but there's no way it's used. Well, actually, there's some ways it could be. For instance, Amazon's repackaging service is a great example of in theory, something that sounds great, but something that in practice is terrible. Because when a product comes through the Amazon repackaging service, the fulfillment center representative handling your returned item has like 12 seconds to look at your product and determine if it's fulfillable or unfulfillable. And if they mark it as fulfillable, but it's already been used by somebody else, then your next consumer is going to get it and open one of these used sold as new complaints that then potentially gets your account or your product suspended. And while it was none of your fault, you have to sit back and think about that in your plan of action that, well, hey, check that first, because that's a really easy step, and you check that and then see, well, that could be a problem, part of the problem. And so then taking ownership, which is an Amazon principle, that's really crucial to getting your listing reinstated. So taking the emotion out of it, making sure that it's properly written, having several people look at it, and either professionals or even just coworkers or friends to look at it that really can review it and make sure that what you've written makes sense. Those are all like crucial steps to getting your account reinstated. And not being afraid to ask for help, because ultimately, time is money. So if it costs more money to go to a professional, like any number of the suspension firms, to get it done, but they get it done much faster, it ends up being worth it on a cost-benefit analysis to do that in the long run.
Okay, Jeff, you did actually mention there's a number of tries available for appeals. Usually, how many tries are available? How long does the process take from start to finish?
So from when you get your suspension notice to when it can be reinstated, you actually only have 17 days to get it right before your account goes into kind of like a, no man's land, that then it becomes where you have to go to like either Amazon Legal or Jeff Bezos or, arbitration, like one of the more advanced restoration techniques. But during that time, there's actually new articles that have been surfacing just as recent as last week. They're saying that Amazon's now giving sellers 2 tries. Although that's nothing set in stone, really depends on who is reading your appeal that day, because the person that reads the appeal right now and the person that reads it 2 hours from now could most likely be two totally different people, and they might read the exact same plan of action and have totally different responses as to whether one's acceptable and the other one says it's not acceptable. So that's kind of part of the problem with Amazon too, where you just don't know who you're going to get. And so and you don't know how many tries they're going to give you, because it just depends on how serious your suspension is.
Okay. Jeff, in terms of suspension, what is the most common reasons for suspension do you see a lot?
I'd say inauthentic has become a much more hot button suspension lately, where people are claiming items are inauthentic, the used sold as new, or item not described suspension. a lot of consumers, they just don't put much thought into it when they're returning an item. And so they click whichever button gives them free return shipping because they don't want to pay for shipping it back to Amazon without thinking about the consequences. Like I have friends that I've seen them going through the Amazon return process before for other items. I'm like, hey, wait a second, what are you choosing, this item? And she was like, well, I just wanted to get a free shipping label. And I'm like, but you realize by saying item not described or item is defective, you're going to potentially put this seller in jeopardy. And she was like, I had no idea. And so from, now she always goes and chooses the correct option. But a lot of people don't know that. So they just choose whatever, 1, 2, or 3 are on the list and they just send it in without thinking. And then you get these suspensions that, are really unfair to the seller, but that's what kind of happens. So.
Yes, yes. That is definitely interesting. A lot of beginner sellers on Amazon start their business as a sole proprietorship, largely due to the fact that it's free and easy. How important do you think is to establish a legal entity in an Amazon business?
So legal entity for an Amazon business, as you grow, it's very important. When you first start out, I think it's great to start out as a sole proprietorship. Like if you take this college student who's, got $20 and his parents are giving him $300 to start his first private label product, like that type of seller, I wouldn't say go set up an LLC or set up a corporation, because that's going to be a lot of money for them to spend to set up that entity. Whereas if it's someone that's more established, like say you're buying, 1,000 MOQ of a private label product, you're spending $10,000, to get this product, you're going to have all this PPC marketing. Well, for that seller, it makes more sense because they're investing more resources to look at their legal entity. Along the, the legal entity is really important because it protects your personal assets in the event that you have a product that hurts somebody or for whatever reason. There's crazy things that happen that you would never foresee. One of the products that I sell actually was an air freshener that you plug into the wall. And this was a couple years ago. And somebody sent me an email one time saying that, well, I plugged it in and it started smoking. And luckily they unplugged it and threw it in some water, and that was the end of it. And the customer was happy to get a full refund, and that was that. But you could see that air freshener could have gone much differently if they'd left it there and gone on vacation, and maybe it burned their house down. And if you don't have a separate legal entity between your personal assets and your business, well, then your personal assets like my home or my family, your stocks and bonds, that could have all been at risk because of this. And, yes, every seller has to carry the $1 million policy on Amazon, but it's just better from an asset protection standpoint to have a legal entity between, just to make it that much harder for somebody to come after you personally, to put it in between you. So if you're starting up from scratch and you don't have the money to invest in legal help to figure out which legal entity is best for you, then put it as a 6-month reminder. Put it on your calendar 6 months from now, see how you're doing. And if you're making stable income, then it might be worth the investment to talk to, an attorney to deal with it. And, our firm, we do this all the time for both domestic and international sellers because for an international seller, there's all sorts of treaty obligations that, my partner, Paul Rafelson, who's a tax lawyer, he can help figure out what's the best way from a tax perspective to make sure that you're not, for instance, paying double taxation in the United States in your home country. So there's a lot of things to consider there.
Do you see a lot of US Amazon sellers having business entities nowadays?
I'd say it's definitely increasing because it's relatively inexpensive form of protection to get a legal entity. And there's also a lot of tax benefits, especially with the tax reform that's happened this past year, where if you're actually set up as an LLC or a corporation, the corporate tax rate went down. So it's 25% in the United States now. And then for the LLCs, there's now a 20% deduction that's going into effect for 2018 taxes. And you can't get that as a sole proprietorship. So there's a lot more deductions and other business tax advantages from being a corporation or an LLC. So I see, so all of this, I'd say a majority of the serious sellers are definitely becoming LLCs and corporations. I think that trend is only going to continue to increase over the next 12 months as people start to realize how much they can save on their taxes by becoming formally organized.
You did mention about the taxes, and we know that there's the holiday seasons underway. There's a lot of activity across the e-commerce channels, including Amazon. We've also got a wind of legal changes that could happen across the US. Are there any important tax-related federal law amendments that all the sellers need to know before the start of Q1?
So there's nothing actually, the waters are pretty calm right now for Q4. Nothing's changing in 2018 besides what changed at the end of 2017. And that was the tax reform that was put into place in 2017. So that's going to be really interesting. It's really going to affect people in Q1 as they start filing their taxes, because it's a pretty much unprecedented amount of change in terms of the U.S. corporate tax and how taxes are going to be filed, especially with this new deduction that they're offering for small business owners. So it's going to be a very interesting, Q1, January through April, when people start filing their taxes. And it's also a very good wake-up call, because a lot of sellers are going to want to stay away from places like H&R Block or TurboTax, because while that worked before, with all the important federal changes that happened over this 2018 that are in effect for the 2018 taxes, they're gonna want to make sure they go to a CPA, especially one that understands Amazon law, or talk to a tax lawyer that can help them to make sure that they're not paying too much. Because if you just try to do it yourself, there's a chance a lot of people will be overpaying. And there's also the other big thing that is happening right now is that a lot of sellers are talking about is Amazon turned over data to the state of California on November 6th. And so that specifically was a list of all the sellers who operated in the state of California in 2017 for FBA. So they turned over federal tax IDs or social security numbers in the case of sole proprietorships. They turned over contact information and the seller's name. So that's going to be a big issue coming up in 2019, because a lot of experts are assuming that California is going to start sending out nexus questionnaires or notices of tax due, saying that sellers owe taxes. And I believe California, they have a 6-year look back period. And so they're going to be trying to collect as much as they can. So the important thing for sellers is if they do receive a notice, a nexus questionnaire or a notice of tax due, they really need to talk to a tax lawyer. Because for instance, like Paul Rafelson, our tax attorney, he's got a lot of experience where, working with different governments, he might look at the nexus questionnaire and realize that it doesn't even need to be filled out, because sometimes the nexus questionnaires are fishing expeditions. But for the sellers that receive this notice from the state of California that says, nexus questionnaire, and it's, multiple pages, did you have activity, did you have employees, all these extensive questions for sellers, and they get overwhelmed and they just start checking different boxes thinking that they're required by law to answer this, when a tax attorney can look at it and say, well, wait a second, no, this isn't actually required by law. So, you're going to have to find the information some other way. And so that's where it really comes down to having, making sure that you don't just blindly fill out nexus questionnaires, because a lot of states are starting to issue them. I know Massachusetts just sent out around, California is going to be sending out around. So it's kind of, in a sense, seller beware, but also make sure you have a strategy in place for if you receive them, so you're not caught off guard.
In terms of tax-related issues, what type of sellers usually face these issues? Is it a power seller or a beginner seller from the start itself?
So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. The states don't really care who they're going after. They're going to go after whoever they think is the easiest target. So unfortunately, if the states see one of the power sellers on the list, they're going to send them, a nexus questionnaire to try to get information. But the power sellers are most likely going to have an attorney on hand, and so they're going to turn that over to their attorney and probably not respond to the nexus questionnaire. So it's a lot of the smaller sellers, and that's California's approach right now in particular, that they've even said, they'd rather get 25,000 small sellers that each owe $1,000 in taxes that they force them to pay up than try to go after 25 power sellers that's going to cost them thousands of dollars in litigation expenses to sue the sellers to get the money. So the states are kind of changing their tactic. They used to only focus on the top sellers. And so they'd say like, oh, if you don't make $1 million a year in sales, you don't have to worry. But states are changing their tactic now, and they're sending out their net to everyone. So they'll send out an nexus questionnaire to power sellers, and like every seller on the list basically. And they're just hoping to see who's going to respond. And whoever responds, unfortunately, will be the ones paying. And the ones that don't respond potentially won't be paying. So it's kind of it's a catch-22, and it's a sad situation that violate, a lot of attorneys, we believe that it violates, due process and other, amendment, constitutional issues. And so it's an interesting challenge, because we all know that there's one seller out there who realistically could have paid the taxes and should have collected them and remitted them, and that's Amazon, because they're doing in Washington and Pennsylvania and all the other marketplace facilitator states. They could have easily done it for, all the rest of the states too. So it's interesting to see where it's going.
That is definitely interesting, and that is something all sellers need to have a look. Since the past couple of years, there have been several instances where listings getting hijacked on Amazon. When you call the Amazon seller support, they usually inform you that they cannot help you. In this case, what is the legal course of action to beat the hijackers and take control of your listings?
So this is where having a trademark actually is really essential. And it's where it becomes really interesting, because if you don't have a trademark, it's very hard to get someone off your listing. Once you have a trademark, though, the trademark allows you to create material differences between your listing and the other sellers on your listing. So for instance, if you create a warranty policy, or you have a satisfaction guarantee for products that are purchased from an authorized dealer, those types of policies help make it so that when someone lists against your ASIN, even if they're buying your product and trying to list it, that the product's not the same. Because if you say that only the first person to purchase this product receives, a manufacturer's warranty of, 1 year, or whatever policy that you determine, well, then if somebody purchases your product and lists against it, and tries to compete with you for the buy box, they're not competing on a like product. And so that in those cases, you can actually get Amazon to take them down. The other way that trademarks come into effect is from a counterfeiter perspective. So once you have a trademark, if someone lists against your product and they don't, and it's a totally counterfeit product, that's where you can actually open cases with Amazon, seller support, and say, rather than saying this person's selling on my listing and they shouldn't be, you say this person's selling on my listing and it's a counterfeit product. Well, Amazon doesn't like counterfeits, so they're actually going to respond to that one much more quickly than the complaining about someone listing on your product. So, but all of that comes down to having a trademark, because a lot of sellers don't even realize this. They'll say, oh, send a cease and desist letter to the person that's hijacking my product. Well, in the United States, at least, and in a lot of the European countries, if you send a cease and desist letter, but you don't have any legal basis for sending it, like you just kind of sent a cease and desist letter, but you don't actually have a trademark, you can actually be sued for that yourself, for sending a fake cease and desist letter. And a lot of people don't realize that, and they just go on a Facebook group and someone gives them a template cease and desist letter and think that that's totally fine. And that's it's a problem. So there's different ways that once you have a trademark, both legal and non-legal, from a legal perspective, if someone's, a serial hijacker on your listing and who they are, and they're an actual big time seller that's worthwhile pursuing, you can actually sue them in federal court once you've got a trademark. So you can obtain an injunction and a court order against them to prevent them from going on your listing. And Amazon respects that very heavily. You send a copy to Amazon Legal and they'll take the competitor down pretty darn quickly. Other aspects too, if you have a trademark, you could actually go after them for lost profits. So if they're causing you to lose money, you could go after them for the money that they cost you. So that means seizing any assets that are in their PayPal account or their Amazon, account that's being held for 14 days. But if they're just a small, seller that's kind of popping up on all these different listings, or it's a black hat tactic, often there's no cost benefit to doing that, and you just be spending more time and money, playing whack-a-mole, going down one of those legal avenues, than if you just create, the trademark route the first place and start sending letters to Amazon, letting them know when someone's infringing on your listing.
Jeff, that's interesting. You did mention about the black hat tactics. Is this something you find a lot of sellers complain about?
We do. We've had some interesting cases lately with the black hat tactics, especially when it comes to brand registry. People are starting to abuse brand registry, especially right now in Q4. They're trying to take down, competitors. And so, one of the easy ways to do that is to falsely claim infringement. And it's a really sad thing, because Amazon's extremely difficult to deal with. A lot of times they'll say that they have to get the retraction from the rights owner. And if it's a black hat tactic, the rights owner is never going to give you a retraction. So that's where it's actually, we've been helping people where we contact Amazon legal and we set out the basis to show that it's black hat. For instance, one of the cases lately, the person claiming that their rights are being infringed was actually dead. And so we pointed that out to Amazon legal that, you received this complaint that someone stole this dead guy's identity and was trying to say that our seller was, infringing on his listing. And obviously this is not true because he's dead. So, but again, even though the rights owner, or not the rights owner, but the brand owner, the private labeler, she'd reached out to Amazon, the seller support, and reached out to notice dispute. Unfortunately, they just don't put as much credibility in an email from a seller as they do an email from a lawyer, because when we write the email, they have something to fall back on. And, we've got ethics rules that prohibit us from making false statements. So they take our stuff with a little bit heavier weight than, unfortunately, the sellers, even though the seller was essentially telling seller support the same thing, that this guy is dead. And they just, it comes down to, I guess, credibility and who's more believable in those types of cases.
I think it makes sense to follow the legal procedure itself.
Correct.
We know that some sellers experience issue with their products being unable to clear the HazMat process. Even after submitting safety data sheets as proof, Amazon sometimes disallows it. What other advice can you provide to help with the HazMat process?
So if the number one piece of advice I can give to sellers in the hazardous materials process is don't lie on your declarations. So even if your product's being, not allowed for whatever hazardous materials reason, make sure that you don't lie on your manifest, your declarations, any of your official documentation, because ultimately the hazardous materials policies are there to protect the consumer. They're also there to protect yourself from a business perspective. So a lot of people will remember that back in Dubai in the early 2010s, a UPS plane crashed when it was either taking off or landing from Dubai airport. It was carrying lithium ion batteries, and it killed 2 of the pilots on board because of the crash. And so, if you lie on your declaration, for instance, saying that there's nothing hazardous and there really is something hazardous and it causes somebody to die, it's going to definitely affect you from a financial and even an ethical perspective, because the kind of publicity that you get on you don't want that kind of publicity for your business. The other aspect is, if Amazon catches you for lying on, making a false declaration, then you're dealing with a forged or, manipulated documents complaint, and those are extremely hard to get back. So Amazon takes, any sort of untruthfulness very seriously. So don't lie would be the first step. And then the second step is to just reach out to seller support. So a lot of times with the hazardous materials process, they don't tell you whether it's been approved or declined, and they don't tell you right off the bat why. And so it becomes, it's extremely annoying to have to wonder, you're in limbo wondering what's happening, and you don't know if it's going to ever be approved. But if you reach out to seller support, I've actually found, just from my own business at least, if you have a product that's in HazMat classification and you reach out to them, they will actually connect you to the right people within the HazMat review team and tell you exactly what's wrong with your SDS to get it corrected. And then you have somebody that you can actually submit the corrected SDS back to that will review it right then and there, rather than it going back into the general queue all over again. So opening that line of communication and being patient, and then reaching out to ask for assistance, I found to be the best way to get the hazardous materials issues resolved.
Wow, that's actually a detailed explanation to the HazMat process. Are there any other e-commerce legal criteria issues Amazon sellers need to be aware before starting the business?
So, I guess Amazon sellers need to have think in mind what their long-term goals are. So if their long-term goal is to build a sustainable business that's more than just a hobby, and to build, a brand over time, then they need to think about, the legal aspects of how's it going to go there. So the first step is, have an attorney that's on your side before you need them. So with my business, before I became an attorney, I had mentor attorneys that I would go to that would handle things. So no matter what popped up, I knew who to reach out to when I had an issue, and they could either, help me with the issue or refer me to the right person. So there's so many aspects of legal issues that Amazon sellers a lot of times like overlook. There's the tax issues, there's intellectual property, trademarks and patents, copyrights even. There's there's trust in estates. There's the Amazon account management issues itself, like the reinstatements. There's so many, and then there's company formations. So there's so many different areas that are important to running a successful Amazon business over time, that having a trusted legal advisor is so much more important than using, for instance, LegalZoom or, one of those software packages. I mean, for instance, a big issue right now is Nexus, and a lot of people are turning to one of the software platforms. There's two that are really big, Taxjar and Avalara, that are trying to tell people that they have Nexus and that they need to register in 15, 20, 30 states to collect sales tax. And unfortunately, a lot of sellers are coming to us saying, well, Taxjar told me this, so it must be true, right? And we're looking at their information and saying, well, maybe not necessarily, and so it's so turning to using the right resources. You shouldn't be going to a software vendor to tell you whether you have Nexus in a state, because software is not perfect, and so it might not be 100% correct. Other legal issues that I've seen, one of my personal favorites is actually thinking about patent infringement. And so before you private label a patent or a product in the United States, make sure you do a patent search yourself, or you hire a patent attorney to search to make sure that the product you're going to private label isn't patented. So if you don't mind, I have a prop here to show.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
This is a blender bottle. Let's see, here's the official brand.
Okay.
So this is the blender bottle, and it's probably made in China. I'm not quite sure. But for wherever it's made, it doesn't matter. It's sold by a company here in the United States under the brand name Blender Bottle. And they actually have several patents for that specific bottle, which has a little metal mixing device inside it. And what struck out to me is really interesting was that when I was at a trade show over in Asia a couple weeks ago, I was walking down the show floor, and I saw probably 30 or 40 different manufacturers with that same bottle, but with no name on it, being shown. And so it either said mixing bottle, or some of them even said blender bottle, a couple of them did, and a couple of them just said blender cup, and different variations of that essential thing. And you're walking down the aisles and you're seeing this product, and if you ask them about it, they're like, oh yeah, MOQ 1,000, 40 cents each. And you're like, wow, that is crazy, because you would never be able to get that in the United States. But unfortunately for a small seller, that might be their first product, that they see it and they go, oh my gosh, this would be a hit at my gym because I see all these people with this product, and they don't realize that it's patent protected. Like, it's either, when you bring in a patented product, it's either going to get seized by customs, which Blender Bottle is very big on having customs check for, infringing products, and they get refused entry at the port. Or say they do make it to the Amazon warehouse, well, brand registry makes it really easy for them to take it down for infringement. And then now you're stuck with all these bottles. On the best case, you're stuck with all these bottles that you can't do anything with. And on the worst case, I mean, if say you sold a lot of them, Blender Bottle could actually come after you for infringement, for the damages. And so it's really just it's worth the investment to have, if you're going to be serious about launching a private label product, especially if it's similar to a product you've seen before on the market, make sure you do a patent analysis. So that way that you're not infringing on someone's IP before you bring it in.
That is definitely amazing. Lastly, Jeff, you did mention that you were selling in Amazon as a student. You now run $1 million FBA business in addition to your law firm. Do you have any tips or checklists that some sort of beginner sellers need to follow when they start out?
So I'd say the first step is there's a couple of different things here. The first step I would recommend for people is to pull the trigger. If they're worried about starting and they're just not sure whether they can do it, pull the trigger, see what happens. Sign up for an account, maybe go to Walmart, try some of the retail arbitrage tactics, just get your feet wet so you understand what's going on, and just kind of start to experiment with it. As you grow, I think it's really important to use software. I was looking at what SellerApp offers and a lot of different software packages to help you grow, because what I found is with the software vendors, not only does it help your business, but they offer an incredible amount of coaching that for a new seller that can help you get to the next level. So really taking advantage of your resources and mentorship, is extremely important. Not being afraid to ask for help. If you go to a conference, ask your fellow Amazon people about what you can, what tactics work in their business. I remember going to an Amazon conference a couple of years ago, and someone was telling me about a software company that specialized in getting refunds from Amazon. And I didn't know such a thing worked. I assumed that Amazon, like most sellers do, you assume that Amazon is honest when it comes to getting refunds. And I was shocked when I started going through the reports and signed up with the software company that like the very first month they got $10,000 back for me. And then it kept happening every month. They were getting more and more money back that Amazon was not crediting from the returns correctly. And so that was a big eye opener. I mean, and if I wouldn't have gone to that conference, I would have never talked to the girl sitting next to me who told me all about this refund software. So really networking, not being afraid to try something different. So if you're selling something on Amazon and it's not working, try a new strategy. Don't sit there and say, well, this worked for me in the past, or this worked for some other person, so it must work for me. Because it's extremely different for every single seller on Amazon. So that even kind of goes with, even like the legal advice, if people are giving, saying, well, this is what my lawyer said, or if like I've said some of the advice that I've given in this, chat so far where I've given information, it's not really, don't take legal advice that was given to one other person as being, definitive, because just like the law, Amazon is so different from one person to the next. And then the other part of it is have fun. If you're not enjoying what you're doing on Amazon, there's really no point to it. So Amazon should be just as much a business as it should be like a hobby. And if you're viewing Amazon as your 100% source of revenue and 100% of all of your, business is tied to Amazon, then it sets yourself up where you're extremely dependent on Amazon. So if something goes wrong, like a suspension, it's going to be extremely devastating to your business. But B, it just doesn't, it takes some of the fun of what makes Amazon such a great platform out of things. So make sure you're diversified, make sure you have contingency plans in place for, what happens if you get suspended? Do you have an ability to sell on Walmart or sell on, eBay? Think of those things before you need to have it happen, because the worst thing that can happen is your account gets suspended for some reason, and then you have, bills that are due when you're supposed to have your disbursement and it doesn't show up. And so that's, because it's extremely stressful when that happens. So have contingency plans in place as well. And network, make sure you're building your network with Amazon. I'd say, join as many like types of groups or conferences that you can afford to go to them, because you'll learn so many things, not only from the speakers, but just from people that are there. So
That's pretty awesome, Jeff. I'm sure all of you out there have got a good knowledge about HazMat issues, copyright infringement, private labeling, and all the legal criteria before starting an Amazon business. Thank you once again, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of viewers out there in joining us in today's episode of SellerSPEAK. If you liked today's episode, share the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. To access our 7-day free trial, go to our website www.sellerapp.com. Thank you once again.